do have a story to tell about a powerful woman that God graced us to know, to learn from, to watch, to be challenged by.
Andrea and I went to kindergarten together, okay? Elementary school, high school. She didn't come out of poverty like I did. Her mother was an educator and her father was a doctor, a dentist in our community. So she never wanted for some of the things that many of us were deprived of just because of our circumstance. And unlike many others that came up in a middle class situation, it didn't make her a person of arrogance or indifference. Even though she came from a middle class family, she was a regular sister, always in the neighborhood. She was one of the girls. She was one of the, one of the folks growing, and one of the popular people in high school, not because she was a middle class person, because she was a real person. One of Andrea's cut buddies, as we would say it from old school. And she talked about how they got in and out of stuff. As young people, young women, back in our high school days and elementary, middle school days, and how Andrea was right there hanging and always was part of the group, So she was a free, well-rounded, very confident, and also very talented individual. She was always a leader in terms of the academic societies. The spelling contests at school, early years when we used to have those. She was just an outstanding, intellectually gifted, well-rounded, grounded, free person. And she carried that into her later life and professional life. And I think that's part of what we saw as we saw her moving, because Andrea was, she felt like she belonged. She was, she didn't feel like she was intellectually inferior. She had come out of Negro wealth, if you will, so she didn't feel like she wasn't a poor person. She had a car when we didn't have a car. She had nice clothes. She had traveled. She had been cultured. Andrea was an excellent piano player as a young child. She had, and we only had one private kindergarten for black folk in our whole town when we grew up. Well, she was expected to go to that private kindergarten because of her upbringing. I don't know how, my grandmother who raised me made a major sacrifice to afford for me to go to a private kindergarten. So I was one of those poor kids that's going basically to a kindergarten with more well-to-do kids at that time. But I never saw that have any impact on the personality and the person of an Andrea Harris. Wonderful, free person. And I think we saw that in terms of her professional life and the way she would push the envelope. She was free. She really was free, unafraid.
She was all about, making sure that we had lots of culture and, museums, and you need to know this. We would have arguments at the house that, would always end up in somebody pulling out an encyclopedia to figure out the answer to the question. And, they were just, it was a very scholarly household. And she was from the very onset like a second mom. She and my grandmother both, they are super opinionated. So there is, there's their opinion and there is their opinion. And then when 2 is wrong, see rule number 1. They had a lot of love between the two, but they were kind of like oil and water to a certain extent. They definitely had their heated debates all the time, which was kind of like the standard for just being at my grandma's house. My grandma debated with my aunt, and then my aunt debated with my dad, and then the two of them debated with my dad, and then vice versa. It was just always some type of debate going on in the house. So they were always in church. So every Sunday we went to church. I remember her coming to get me out of school to march on Martin Luther King, for Martin Luther King's birthday, because it should have been a national holiday, and we're not tolerating this anymore. And and we marched downtown Henderson, and that's honestly my biggest memory of actually coming in contact with the KKK. Like, I remember we walked on the right side of the street down through downtown Henderson on Garnet Street, and the KKK were on horses with hoods on, and some of them without hoods on, walking through the streets like screaming at us. She took us everywhere, really everywhere. From the nation's capital, I remember it's all these stories, that they're doing now about the nation's capital and everything going on in the world today. I just have these memories of being up there with her, and she kept saying, "You guys, all y'all want to do is go to the pool. I bring y'all to the Smithsonian Institute, this and that place, and the National, and the Washington Monument, and the Jefferson Memorial," all these places that she was so impressed with. And we were like, what time are we going to be back at the pool? Of course, her Bennett College.
Say Bennett, Bob.
Bennett was sacred for her.
Bennett College.
Very passionate about Bennett.
Bennett College.
Bennett College.
A Bennett College issue.
Bennett.
The Bennett bell to the last chime.
When she was at Bennett, she was in that group. If you ever talk to any Bennett bells, they'll tell you, maybe I think she was in Gladys Robinson's class. And they just raised hell on the campus all the time. And for the right reasons, okay?
Bennett was a foundation for us. When we went to school in the mid-60s, late mid-60s, what we learned at Bennett was that we had to be involved in community. We couldn't just stay on campus and learn what was going on, but we had to be involved in the community to learn what was going on around us.
Because she had done a lot of her maturation at Bennett, leaving Henderson. That was where she landed, was at Bennett College. And at a very turbulent time in our country, which I know helped to shape the person that she was. Having been in Bennett and Greensboro when the Woolworth situation happened, and A&T's campus was attacked by the police.
And then we were there during the turn of Bennett's culture. We felt that a 9 p.m. curfew and, you know, the gloves and hats, but we didn't need the hats. So she says that she followed me in terms of sit-ins on campus because we slept out at the president's house to say, no, we aren't going to do this anymore. We're not going to have a 9 o'clock curfew coming into campus, and these things have got to change. So we did change some things. We changed quite a few of the policies on campus in terms of curfew and hats and that kind of stuff. We still wore a little kerchief, but we weren't going to wear hats and gloves down. We weren't going to do it at that. And we felt that we needed to be outside of the gates. So she, as well as I, went down the street to the Greensboro Association of Poor People, the GAP. And we got involved in what GAP was doing. And GAP was involved in helping people who worked in cafeterias and, you know, the blue-collar worker people who made, I think, 50 cents an hour if they made that much during that time, helped them to get better wages because all of them were our people. And then also garbage workers. We helped with the garbage worker strikes and all of those things that GAP did in terms of raising the standard of living of poor people who were trying to take care of their families but had no way up. And there was nobody to help them.
Bennett women went to jail. President at the time said, I'm gonna, we'll give you your exams in jail, but you all are here for the right reasons. And so she just kind of grew up in that culture.
So she got involved in housing. And during that time, Bennett had all of the old boarded up houses around it, very needed really housing development, and had not gotten that kind of money, so she was involved with the whole redevelopment around Bennett.
I was teaching a class for Soul City, and I learned about getting around Warren County. And so I heard about this young, dynamic person who was running a community organization, and that's when I first heard about her.
Now, I met her there. I came down to work with Floyd at Soul City, and she came over to Soul City because it was, nothing was there but trailers, but it was the thing. And we just met and, you know, just began to talk, and same age, and she had a brother, so we used to hang together. But when I first met her, I was just shocked. I said, daggone, I didn't expect to find Andrea Harris in Warren County. I mean, I just did not expect it. Now, that was just my expectation coming from the north, being in the country for the first time, but so we just got to know each other, and I thought, daggone, I need to get her to come to work here. I was a day late in asking her to come to work at Soul City, but that worked out well because she was running the community action agency, Franklin Vance Warren Opportunity, Inc. That covered Franklin Vance Warren counties. They were doing Head Start, summer feeding programs, some stuff with adults. So Andrea was running that, and she was just very interested in, even then we were talking about Black economic development, and she was just interested in it.
My father was in that early crowd of community developers in late 1960s, 1970s. And they were talking about the state and how things that need to happen and why we couldn't give up just after the death of Dr. King, and the kind of development that needed to happen, particularly in eastern North Carolina, particularly in northeastern North Carolina, in the rural counties where the Black Belt was. They were talking about the power, and I was sitting there as a little kid just watching. And in the midst of mostly men, I will say, there were a few women, mostly men, but there was a woman that was in that midst that had the respect of everybody there. She was short, bright skin, short hair, but she was a powerhouse. And she was always thinking about the people. Now, interestingly, I learned later in life that she actually ended up working for Governor Holshouser, who was a Republican, but not the kind of Republicans we see today. He was a different kind of Republican, and he really had an interest. Andrea got involved and pushed that governor, and subsequently Democratic governors and others, to never forget rural economic development, to never forget minority economic development. She was always talking about in those meetings, we have to have the data. We can't just go in with emotion. We gotta have the data. And the data we need is not just what are the needs of our communities, but what our communities provide. She said we have to have, I remember even then, we have to have a way of saying in Harnett County, in Washington County, the African American economic impact is this. The business impact is this. She said we must make sure that we have a seat at the table, not only because we ought to, but because we paid for it. And we continue to pay for it. She said for too long, the power, the economic power of the minority black community has been written off. And people think we come to the table simply with our hands out, when in fact, if you get the data, you would show that our communities have been at the key and at the foundation of the upholding of the South and the Southern economy. Even, it was certainly during slavery, it's been so even after slavery. And I can remember she would be there late into the night. Sometimes those meetings would go on till 3 in the morning.
She had so much influence in the community. I mean, my grandmother would always say, Andrea, don't answer the phone, just stop answering the phone. And she would say, Mama, these people need me. What do you mean? There is no, who else, if I don't do it, who else is gonna do it? And grandma would say, I don't know, somebody other than you. Because the phone would ring all hours of the night, all day, all the time, with people just in the community who would call and say, she would get up in the morning and say, well, this happened with that person or this person overnight, and now we gotta go. And I'm like, who is going and where are you going? But she had her connections and her people. I got to go talk to the mayor or the city council, or they're planning on putting the sewage lines over here again in our neighborhoods. She was always very passionate about just our community and making sure that we were on the winning end and that things were not continuing to be the status quo, which was a real problem, and it's still a real problem in North Carolina.
Soul City bellied up in '79, and I went to work for the state in June of '80. I had an opening in '81, I guess I had my first opening. That's when I hired Andrea. I called Andrea, I said, Andrea, I need you to come work for me. And a number of people were, oh Lou, why'd you get her? What does she know about business? And I said, look, this is not about business. I said, what we're doing, this is a struggle. I mean, you ask somebody to give up something that is theirs, that's a struggle. I said, and there are going to be fights, and Andrea has more balls than most men that I know. She's not going to run away, and that's what's needed, somebody that can, stand in there, take the hit, and keep on going. And Andrea knew how to work the political system, and she was just very good at that, because I didn't have that kind of patience for all of that BS. But Andrea she was just unbelievable.
My father always said to me, if there's one sister in North Carolina that you want to stay in touch with, it's Andrea Harris. So I don't know if I looked at her kind of like a quasi-mother figure in the movement, mentor, or a sister, because she always told me, don't talk about I'm old, I'm not old. But what I know is I left the area after college, after being at North Carolina Central, at Duke University, and I went to Martinsville, Virginia. And I was at Martinsville, Virginia, and I was pastoring. And events happened that forced me to have to come back to North Carolina. I had to leave the congregation I was pastoring. and come back to North Carolina for family reasons and medical emergency reasons. When I came back to North Carolina, I had an offer to serve part-time as the chaplain at North Carolina Central University, campus minister. But I remember on the process of coming back, I get a call. And the call was from Andrea Harris. And she says, listen, she is a Delta now. That's part of the story. She was a Delta to her heart. She even knew stories about me and the Deltas at school. I didn't know she knew. She came to me one day and said, I heard you stole the Delta line during one of the weeks. You better be glad I wasn't there when you did that. But she called me and said, Barbara? I said, yes, who is this? She said, this is Andrea Harris. I said, hello, Andrea, how you doing? She said, well, I really miss your daddy. Our daddy had gone on to glory. Had gone on to glory then, and when she called me, you know, my mind, my soul went to those rooms, and I could hear his voice and hear those discussions. And I remember what he said, if there's one sister you want to stay in touch with. Felt a little ashamed because I hadn't stayed in touch with her. But she said, I have an event the Deltas are sponsoring, and I want you to come speak. And Grant Hill, who was either a player at Duke at the end of his time or had just gone into pros, he was gonna be the speaker as well. She said, I know what's in you because I know your daddy. And I want you to come and talk to us about faith, and I want you to talk to us about economic justice. And I said, okay. And as is the case, what I learned from my father, you don't ever, when certain people call you, say, well, what's the honorarium? You go. If date is free, you go, because they have paid the kind of dues that if they need you, you go. And so I went, and this is in 1992, 93. 93, I think, actually, toward the winter months of 93. And when we got there, like it was with Andrea, it was packed because, you know, she was a consummate organizer. Everybody from that area was seemingly there. And immediately when I came in, she said, this is Barbara's boy. How you doing? She hugged me. And she certainly started doing the networking. This is so-and-so with this bank, and this is so-and-so with this community agent, and this is so-and-so who works for this, and this is so-and-so. You need to get to know them now. They work in housing. And she just started networking. It's almost as though though we had not seen each other for a while, because of her connection with my father and connection with those old meetings, she said, let me hook you up, you know. And that was you hook people up. That's what they call it networking today. But back then it was hooking folk up. And if you were in the movement, there were certain people you had to know. You needed to know them because their works demanded that you know them.
Many times I'd be in a room and I didn't know she was there, and she would come up and tap me on the shoulder, and I'd look around and it's Andrea, and she'd just be smiling. And I'd say, girl, how you doing? What are you up to now? I know you're up to something. She said, yeah, I want to talk to you. I've got several things I want to talk to you about. And she would enumerate them right there, right on the spot, and say, Bob, I need your help. I want you to do this. I want you to make this call. I want you to go to this meeting with me, or something else. Because she was always on it.
But I got to know her when she and Lou Myers and Abdul were thinking about putting together an organization that she called a think tank.
Tyronza Richmond was the dean of the business school at Central. The dean of the business school at A&T was involved. So we got those folk involved because, you know, we wanted to do something really serious. But so we set that up, and it started out as a think tank.
Andrea believed that the Institute needed to be associated with the university. She said the university could do two things. One is it would help minorities to be competent, to do the work, because it made no sense to go out and get opportunities for people and then not have people who could perform in those places. And then second, and then she thought that the university was a place that could create data and knowledge. So that's how she had two views about the university and how they could fit in.
Lou at the time was assistant secretary. Lou Myers, who's currently the board chair of the Institute, was assistant secretary of commerce in North Carolina. And Ms. Harris and some others really had this idea of how do you continue to provide resources to communities and forget about the black communities in the state budget and the state legislature. And she also focused that and said, you know, we have all these people of color. How do we make sure that we make sure the policies are also works in their favor? And so she thought around, well, do we get a fair share of economic impact from the disbursement of capital from the legislature? Do we get our fair share of opportunities in the public and the private marketplace? And she brought that to Lou's attention, like we need to start studying this information so we can start giving the information to the legislature so they can react responsibly. And I think she spoke with Lou and also at the time, Terry Stanford. I don't know if he was a senator at the time, and they said, why don't put this in a university, and won't you create a nonprofit and focus on that? And it came out to be the Institute of Minority Economic Development, and to look at a place of higher education and a focus on development and providing information. And later they did provide that kind of information to the legislature to show them the impact, the adverse impact of not including diverse organizations in their funding model and how they could be changed if they decide to do that.
We incorporated it in 1986 when we got our first funding, and we talked about it because I remember one of our discussions was this ought to be the North Carolina Institute of Black Businesses. Andrea, no, Lou, no, it needs to be minority. I said, no, Andrea, it needs to be black business. No, so we would go through our brother-sister fight, and then but she was right. So we got our first funding in '86 from Z. Smith Reynolds.
My first involvement with Andrea is when I first met her sometime in February of 1993. I was a legislative liaison for the Department of Health, Environment, and Natural Resources, and the appropriation subcommittee meetings took place in room 421, Legislative Office Building. So I'm sitting in the meeting, and in walks Andrea. I didn't know her. She had on a black pantsuit with a bag over her shoulder that had a big white binder in it. That's how I remember first meeting her. Because she walked in like she owned the place. I was brand new, didn't know a thing.
She could get to anybody, and the people that she called, and if she referred them to you, they would take your call, they would take you seriously, and they would not put you on the back burner.
You can't know Andrea Harris and not have known what an advocate she was for right, for people, and for the whole world. I say whole world because Andrea took a global view to the most local opportunities, and she was a negotiator. She negotiated deals, she negotiated relationships. Basically, she was the glue between many a relationship that exists today for people.
She came along when Republican was in control. And they probably looked at Ms. Harris like, who is this little African-American petite woman here telling us what we should do? I'll tell you a funny story. Lenny Springs was at Wachovia. A lot of people don't know the story. Lenny Springs got there because of Ms. Harris. Wachovia is going through this whole diversity initiative and had to find the right person. And Ms. Harris said, your problem is in your upper executive level, in the C-suite, you have nobody look like me. She went out and says, I got the right person. Here's his background, here's what he could do. Wachovia hired Lenny. Lenny did very well on the procurement diversity side. Lenny got on the NAACP board. Lenny Springs would tell you, it wasn't for Ms. Harris advocating for him on the C-suite side, his career would be totally different. And to me, that's what's so powerful.
I can't even remember the first time I met her. I think it was in a big group meeting when there was a lot of finger pointing going on with the old Wachovia, which we learned from, and we got better and better until it just was a business that was self-sustaining, but not without Andrea's catalytic powers. She helped me to be better, constantly being better, and help institutions and organizations be better all the time. Because she could tell you the truth, she'd tell you the truth. And she'd just do it with such love.
I said this before, I think I posted it. The things she said to me consistently, I'm sure she said to others. Always remember you black, and what you do is for black people. And you did, I did a lot of other things, but when you think about the situations of the day, how poignant that is right now. It needed to be done. It needed to be done better every year. And we all know when we've had moments when you might think or you forget who you are, and you get reminded that you are black. And if you're doing stuff and you forget, the result has some impact, either by omission or commission on black people. And that was just something that, her brilliance made you continue to understand that, because she cared about you and she cared about black people.
We explained it good enough the first time. I thought we explained it good enough the first time.
The class struggle's existence is the beginning. It is always.
Andrea Harris was, and even up in glory, is a black woman. She cared not just intellectually, but in her soul about black people, about other marginalized people, and about women.
The people shouldn't have to hold the state accountable. The state should just be accountable. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power.
can see it here. These are non-Hispanic whites and non-Hispanic blacks. The non-Hispanic blacks in gold, the whites are in dark blue. You see that we are again to the left of 18 to 44, at 18 to 44 and to the left, preponderance of our population. The white population is this aging population. They're older and have lower fertility rates, so that's what's going to drive population change. So I don't know what your philosophy and view is on immigration and all of that, the demographic change, but it's very predictable. You can see the changes. You can sit at the wheel and sleep if you want to. I told you, don't call me and say, I'm out of business. Look at the numbers. They speak for themselves. They don't lie.
Businesses that are growing most rapidly, that are generating jobs, that are creating all the innovation are small businesses. Small businesses are 13 times more innovative on a per worker basis than our large corporations. That's where the engine of growth is coming from. Minority businesses are growing 3 times as fast as our small businesses. And businesses that understand the growing and increasingly diverse business environment, both domestically and internationally, are those that will be better positioned to take advantage of that. So that while we are confronted with enormous challenges, the changing world environment also opens up tremendous opportunities, and we need to be aware of that.
Yeah, the Executive Networking Conference was a way to collect.
Was that her? Did she
Yeah.
come up with the idea, or?
Well, I think it was a bunch of business people. What she's found out was that a bunch of people, majority people would. She said we need to get Black people and Hispanic people and Asian people and Latino and Indian people together with white corporate leaders. People did business with people they knew. But then she also said people do business with people they like. And so how do you get people to learn to like each other, to build relationships? And so there were a group of African American leaders who would go down to Pinehurst and play golf and play cards. And she learned about that. And she said, wow, Pinehurst. We also know a lot of the corporate leaders like Pinehurst as a destination place.
The thing that was always so tremendous about ENC, it was right on time. My year didn't start, I was like, I need to know exactly what I need to do and not do moving forward. ENC is what's gonna make it happen.
During my time in working with her, I said, let's move this name from golf and tennis to Executive Networking Conference. So it could fit under a conference space, we can raise money and also make sure we raise the content and bring in corporate leaders. I mean, we were blessed. I mean, we had 3 of the richest people in America be speakers at our conference. We've had Janice Howroyd, Brian Howroyd, who's a North Carolina native, come be a speaker. We've had Dave Stewart, who runs a $8 billion business, be a speaker. We've had Junior Bridgman, who was the largest franchise owner of all franchises and now is a Coca-Cola distributor in Canada and in the Midwest. I mean, you think about the 3 largest Black businesses today.
I think the biggest thing that Andrea pushed was the fact that, first of all, people did business with people that they knew, okay? And so one of the things that this whole ENC was designed to do was to give us a better chance to get to know each other, okay? And because many times we're always running, as from a time standpoint in our jobs or in our family life, but this particular weekend was set aside to kind of slow down, to give people that opportunity to know each other. I mean, interestingly, Andrea came about, I think, at the height of the civil rights kind of initiative, so to speak. And she has kind of served as the bridge between civil rights and now economic rights. Because obviously if you didn't have that economic right, okay, the civil right was really not a whole lot. I mean, yeah, it allowed you to go certain places, but could you really be a part of the so-called American dream if you didn't have that economic piece as well? So that was one thing that Andrew was always pushing us, because now we have the right, but do we have the
the rights, the financing, the relationships, the opportunities to really take advantage of these new civil rights that we have.
So my first experience with ENC was as a banker. At what venue could I have access to executives on a personal level? You don't get that in your company. It's rare that you get that in your company. But in that space, I could literally be sitting right next to a corporate CEO or an executive vice president of a corporation that I would have never had an opportunity to do that with in the past.
When you think of ENC and you think of Ms. Harris, you have to go back, the wisdom to have that organization to support in a systemic way, in a strategic way, minority businesses that wasn't necessarily coming to be transparent. Some work was being done by, the council which I ran. Some work was being done in local cities and on the state level, but nobody was doing it in a powerful way the way she was. She could garner money, she understood grants and bids, she knew what money was available in places nobody else might not know, and she had the leverage to make sure it got to the right places. So, ENC was as powerful, and she was, and I always said this, she was the most powerful woman in the state when it came to minority development, if not just as powerful political woman that I knew in the state.
I felt like I was in a national event with the CEOs, finance officers, heads of procurement. I said, this is terrific. It really elevated the issue of supplier diversity and how important connections were. And I'm a lifelong golfer, so you're excused to play golf, but to be in to your point, to be in a golf cart with a nonprofit leader, a minority business owner, just got us connected. But I was so impressed, having come from commercial bank. I said, this is more like a commercial banking, which is exactly what it was. It's about commerce together.
We can't find nobody, okay? We can't find anybody. So she took that argument away, okay? Not only have I found them, and they're right here today. They're ready to talk to you. I mean, they got the cars, they got the website. I mean, they got the financial backing, okay? So she was able to take away that argument, we can't find nobody. Okay, we'll go out and find them for you. We're gonna put you in the same room together, put you on the same golf cart, put you at the same dinner table, okay? So you will not be able to say, we can't find anybody.
People were more inclined to make a commitment in that environment than they were otherwise. I mean, they wouldn't nearly give you the amount of time that you could get on a weekend talking, and particularly after Andrea and some of the speakers that she brought finished speaking. If you weren't motivated, if you weren't convicted, it was likely you would be after after the sessions were over. And just the opportunity to sort of interact with people, whether it's on the golf course or sitting around just having a chat, was a great environment to expand your relationships.
We were one of the first conferences that I'm aware of that were able to bring in these great leaders from like the National Minority Supply Development Council president, leader Harriet Michelle was one of our speakers. We brought in Susan R. Allen, who is on the National Asian, Pan-Asian Council. She came down. We've had Ron Busby, who was the U.S. Black Chambers president. We've had the Native American champions been there. We've had leaders throughout the country that comes to Pinehurst in North Carolina. This all birthed out of Ms. Harris's thought. We had Julianne Mavo, an economist, to come down and tell us about the economy. We have Janetta Cole, a stateswoman in education and in business, and help create processes. And then also we've had great corporate leaders like Willie Deese, who was a Chief Procurement Officer and Vice President at Merck, and you just get really excited. And then we've had people that are local. When we created the Bob Brown Trailblazer Award, given to Bob Brown, who was a key element in Nixon's administration that started black capitalism and infused and catalyzed the Minority Business Development Agency, which is now the largest minority business funded organization in the government. So we've had all those people. When you start to catalog the capacity of and the capabilities of the businesses that have been there and how they've grown, and the leaders that we've had to speak, and the political leaders that we've had to speak, it's a powerful, energizing environment. But that was a place where we've probably done over $500 million of transactions because people got a chance to know one another, build the relationship, use that social capital, transfer that social capital into marketing capital, and that marketing capital end up being contract capital. So not only get a chance to be able to come together with people to learn and who they are, so you get a chance to know the people, like the people, you began to build this thing called trust. And business is built on the railways and the highways of trust. And that trust is sometimes built in social networks. And so it gave people of color a chance to engage in an environment of social capital, which was an undergirding process to get to the capital and contracts. So it's really an exciting time. We did that for about 16 years together and really enjoyed that work.
Fortunately, I was one of the persons that was very involved in the creation of this event back in the 80s. And one of the reasons why we put it in place was because we recognized that we were communicating and socializing with each other within the minority business community, but there was very little interaction in the true corporate community and among the senior executives. And that's why we put this in place.
The Executive Networking Conference is a premier event and opportunity for minority-owned businesses and corporate representatives to build relationships, to get to know one another, and to do business. If there's anything that we've learned over the last few years, it is that people really do business in informal, non-rigid environments. And we are very excited about the Executive Networking Conference. As each year it gets better in providing information and little education to all of the participants and others, so that we all have a real understanding of the value of supplier diversity.
It is my favorite conference, and I do a lot of conferences. What I'm trying to do is to invite people to think differently about supplier diversity, about minority business development. How can they, as corporations, use supplier diversity as a competitive tool? How can they build a program that adds competitive value to their companies? And so we led them through a process. We will lead them through a process that talks about the elements of a competitive supplier diversity program. But it's a change in thought, a change in processes, and change in activities.
You do get to become more on a personalized basis with those people that can advocate for you, either with other businesses or within corporations. It also gives you more insight into what the trends are that are occurring in corporate America or in purchasing overall that can then help you do better with aligning your business goals and business strategies to what's going on in the world.
It's hugely important because you can come here at a grouping and at a conference like this, and you can learn so many things. You can meet many people who you would never have a chance to get inside their office or meet them. CEOs and other top people in industry, people who have done so many different things and who have already proven that they can make it happen. And you can see how they can make it happen, and sometimes you can get one idea from a meeting like this that can take you on to the sky and make you hugely successful. This was something that I advocated many, many years ago. We started advocating this sort of thing when I worked for President Nixon. I was one of his assistants, and we started the whole Minority Enterprise Program.
There's been no real central agency for Indians in the state. I mean, Indians are a little bit different, and the way they do business is a little bit different because they're more community oriented. They're a less trusting people for lots of reasons that I won't go into. And the other business problem that we have, if you would consider it a problem, is that we're tribal. we still operate in tribes. You know, we've got 8 tribes in the state. I am the leader of one of those tribes as well as the leader of the initiative, so I can speak from a tribal perspective as well. Let me go back and say this. I think Andrea and the Institute have done a marvelous job at taking a very, very deep stab at collecting all data for all minority folks, because in their buying power guide, they list Indian data. As a matter of fact, it's so good that we use it for our Indian associates, because Indian folks have not done a very good job on their own of collecting their own data.
The level of people here seem to be much higher than the other conferences. I mean, we're talking, you know, media, economists that are on CNN, CEOs that, you know, are printed in today's newspaper that are here today, USA Today. You know, that level I don't think I've seen before, and the interaction, personal interaction. So
national speakers, people I read about in Black Enterprise, Miss Harris had them there. You know, people you see on national board, Miss Harris had them there.
That was Wakanda before Black Panther.
But those ENCs, and it's interesting because she would get all those people and what they would do for her. I think sometimes maybe people thought that it would roll down to everybody else. No, people did things for her that they wouldn't do for anybody else. Once she got a hold of you, it's very hard to say no to. I don't care what level you were or thought you were. She just had such a command of, and such a presence.
Because Andrea had an impact across a number of different communities, disciplines, industries, and in particular the business industry, because Andrea was able to go in and out of CEOs' doors and make proposals that would be acknowledged and acted upon, that benefited a number of African American in particular and women business enterprises across not only the Triangle but the state. And then she had the same kind of reach and access with state government. She interacted with all governors that I know of since Jim Hunt, and had the opportunity to go in and sit down with secretaries of departments and promote and encourage minority business enterprise engagement and participation.
And she was unapologetic about it long before people were in the streets protesting and burning down police buildings. And I think that's what gives her all the street creds, because, you know, it might be fashionable now, but when she was doing it, it wasn't fashionable. And when she was getting corporations to do things, it wasn't because they had some sense of, you know, whatever it is that's going on right now. It was sheer Miss Harris rolling up on them with some facts.
Well, first of all, Miss Harris shared with the group the possibility of doing major projects with major firms, something that hadn't been done here in the city of Charlotte as on a certain level. So she came and inspired us and shared with us the possibility of doing major contracts with the bank, who at that particular time was in a major growth, Bank of America, here in the city of Charlotte. We're doing some major projects, and she was making sure we was equipped with the tools we needed to participate on some of these projects.
Early on, back when I was chair of the Carolinas Virginia Minority Supply Development Council, Ms. Harris convened all of us from North Carolina. And it just so happened at that time, you had the head of the airport, which was Shelby. You had myself, the head of self-help. But she convened all of us who were heads of large organizations across the United States together. And we were all based in North Carolina. And it was one to make sure we knew one another, we knew how to leverage one another, but more importantly, we were there to support one another and to build on. So when that phone rings and you say, listen, I have this going on, I'm gonna need your help. Can I count on you and your organization to be there for us? And it was we all made the agreement, yes, we will be there for one another. And so we're all still in place now in different spaces, but we still leverage one another and support one another on behalf of our diverse suppliers.
Andrea never married, never had kids,
So she treated these folk, I mean, she would just treat them like they were her kids, you know. You can't be dressing like that. You got to watch your mouth. Oh yeah, Andrea was hard, but it was out of love.
She was very passionate about business and ownership, wealth, accumulating assets and wealth that will allow us to, in fact, meet our full potential as a people. Because if we could have the good life as children, matriculate to schools of higher learning, build business and institutions that would speak to what our critical needs are as a people, which then would allow us to contribute to the needs of the society based on who we are.
There was never an HBCU that she didn't love.
What is the story of her life as a graduate of HBCU? As a woman that served on college boards and various places where decisions are made.
We undervalue ourselves. Her notion was, these institutions are valuable, and let me demonstrate their value, and I'm going to demonstrate their value with data. And so that sold a lot better than the social implications.
She also supported all the HBCUs in North Carolina and led a committee to promote and encourage HBCU alumni to engage more with their institutions and be more active and supportive.
HBCUs have to see themselves as a resource, a valued resource. We're not just an appendage that just exists in the community, but we are an integral part of it.
Even if one's talking about Bennett College, where I served as the president, where she was a member of the board. Even at the day of her passing, she was a member of that board. That is a college rooted in social justice. After all, it began, like all of our HBCUs, because black folk were not allowed to go to white folks' colleges and universities. And so you cannot separate our historically black colleges and universities from a social justice agenda.
They take the student where she is and then begins to mold. HBCUs like Bennett allowed the woman to understand what she could be. That maybe she doesn't have the resources, maybe she didn't have the teacher in high school who motivated or who encouraged her, but at Bennett she does. There's somebody there she's going to encounter, whether a professor or a counselor or a residence hall director or an alumni affairs director, who sees that this child is just a woman in the rough who's going to be an Andrea Harris later on in life.
Andrea put forward and got people involved in a study to show the disparities in what the HBCUs were receiving as opposed to what the white institutions were receiving. This was one of the very first major projects that I knew that she had a hand in, and how it worked out, how a bond issue came up, and we got more money out of that bond issue for the historically black colleges and universities than we ever thought that we would get, because of the input that Andrea had in getting the study done.
We talked about HBCUs all the time, because that was one of the things that I'm working on in the Congress, and not only because of what an HBCU did for me. So we shared a lot of the same passion, and maybe that's why we got along so well.
We did make modifications to the HBCU Capital Loan Program. One of the final things that we were working on, which was trying to get that debt forgiven, because it didn't get forgiven in the Great Recession. And though it happened after her death this year, the HBCU Capital Loan forgave over $1 billion worth of loans for HBCUs who had gone through that program. And that included Bennett College for women's $30+ million. So, you know, she lives on, and all the things that she was fighting for, Representative Adams got that done this year in the CARES Act. So it's official.
What I learned is the reason for being is a really compelling one. I don't think that I can identify in my own educational path the level of personal development that alums and students of Bennett articulated. You don't get that from a big predominantly white campus. You just don't get that. And so I really walked away excited about the future for Bennett College, and hopeful that the campus will be able to express to more people what makes it a special place. There are not a lot of spaces like that for African American women. I get why she works so hard to keep that space alive and well.
So sorry for the death of your aunt. I'm like, don't say that. Don't say the death of your aunt, because it's so finite to me that even though I know she's gone, I mean, even knowing that this interview was coming, I had to cry it out just to be able to get through this.
You know, we ain't get to say bye. I didn't. So. That's it, man.
And now I'm thinking about how much I miss her, and that gets sad. But I mean, she was just such a force.
So I was in a state of shock and mourn and all of the above, because this is a time when we need her very badly.
I did not know that my Bennett sister and my soror was ill in a serious way. And so yes, when that news reached me, it was painful. It was sad.
even as we miss Andrea, walking the halls of corporations or government institutions on our behalf, or even just walking up to us with a big hug, even as we miss those things, she will always be present for us because of the impact she made in who we became and who we are and who we will be.
There's some sacrifice involved in the type of position that Andrea had. And the sacrifice I'm speaking of is that sacrificing, time with your family, okay? And in some ways, you're sacrificing your financial earning ability. Just think about it. She could have went probably to corporate America somewhere and got a highfalutin job and paying a lot of money with great benefits. And so a lot of people that could be an Andrea, they're not willing to make the sacrifice of family and finances to help a greater good, so to speak. So I think that's one of the reasons why it's maybe 50 to 100 years that you have these type of people, because there's so many other things that are pulling at them at the same time. Yeah.
Andrea educated many of you within the sound of my voice right now on a lot of stuff. She was a silent educator and she was a vocal one. She could give you a look that taught you a lot more than the words she was speaking. Then again, she could speak in a way that caused you to pause and really take note. More often than not, what you were listening to, what you were being educated by Andrea about, was something you needed to know, and you'll use it for the rest of your lives. I know I will.
I work with people who have worked with her. There are people in DOA who've worked closely with her. One of those is Tammy Hall, who worked with Ms. Harris for many years. And there are times now as we work on things that I've heard her mention, Ms. Harris would not like that, or Ms. Harris didn't lead this world for that, and we have to do better.
When you think about the impact of Andrea Harris, let me tell it from a personal standing and broaden it out. Both of my daughters have been impacted by just her life. My daughter, my oldest daughter, Andrea took her under. She ended up going to Bennett, finished Harvard, is now director of a major center on health and civil rights and public health at Drexel University. My youngest daughter became a Delta partly because of Andrea Harris. She encouraged her to become a Delta, but also she became a tremendous movement writer. And before she died, she had encouraged her to go back and get a degree in public policy. So just on the personal level, and I look at the number of women throughout state government, throughout this state, that are leaders because Andrea Harris did it. And when she did it, it wasn't just, we got to have a place because I'm a woman. She even said to women, you got to bring it. It's not, yes, we need more women involved, but I heard her say to some folk one day, we don't just need women involved just because they're women and then they get into place and they forget that they need to be fighting for the minority community, fighting for the black community. We need women who understand that clearly and who understand that their own purpose in every room they're in is to challenge the inequities that exist and to put on the table the kind of change that needs to happen.
You know, so you stack the deck now. You put Secretary Sanders in there, who is brilliant. You put, who is it, Tammy Hall in there, who is brilliant. Those are two Wonder Women. But guess where they came from? Ms. Harris. You feel what I'm saying? You got Valerie Jordan, it's a flat out killer. Jeremy Collins, Annette, I go down the line. There was nobody on that board that wasn't connected to Ms. Harris.
There are at least 3 or 4 governors who called upon Andrea on many occasions when they were attempting to make decisions that affected African Americans and women.
My friend Andrea Harris was a trailblazer in the fight for social and racial equity in North Carolina. Her Vance County upbringing and her education at Bennett College planted the seeds for her life's work as a community organizer, advocate, and coalition builder. Andrea believed in the power of opportunity, especially for those too often denied opportunity. When doors were intentionally shut, she broke through for women and minority-owned businesses to succeed. She brought passion and tenacity to everything she did, and I often saw it firsthand. From her early days with the Community Action Agency in her hometown, to founding the Institute of Minority Economic Development, working with self-help, and serving on the Governor's Council for historically underutilized businesses, she made things move. She inspired and mentored scores of freedom fighters along the way. I am so grateful for her life, her leadership, and her friendship. In this moment in our history, Andrea's memory urges us to keep working to end racism and injustice and build thriving communities for everyone. Thanks so much. God bless you.
She cared about education as a means to an end, not an end in and of itself. And this is Abdul Rashid talking now, because as we look at what we're faced today in terms of both the pandemic virus as well as the death of George Floyd, if education were the answer, we wouldn't be confronted with all that we're dealing with today. Education is a means. What we want today is justice, not education in and of itself. Education is a means toward justice, and what we need is justice. And Andrea was about that justice issue. And I think to her last breath, she was trying to help us gain justice in a society where we, for 400 plus years now, have continued to struggle.
The work that I do now, and in a sense have always done, and the work that Andrea Harris always did, always had an intersection. Because it really, at the end of every work day, must have been about social justice. When Andrea died and Governor Cooper had that flag flown at half-staff across the state, I don't know that that has been done for any African American female in this state ever. And by the way, she would have shied away from that completely. She would not have wanted them to do it. As a matter of fact, she would have begged them not to do it. She would have begged them not to do it. I would say that Andrea Harris will be remembered because the work that she did, while it was very specific at the Institute and in the other spheres in which she worked, it is a part of a much larger work. Let's call it the work of making sure that we continue on the journey toward greater diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion.
You know, the Bible says you train up a child in the way he will go and they will never depart from it. And I think that the things that Andrea Harris has taught us in terms of how you get in there and get the things that you need for your community, how you lobby till you can't lobby no more. If you follow, you know, I think we have now, we are all being tested. All of the individuals who've interacted with Andrea Harris over the years are all being tested right now. We kind of maybe took her for granted. You think sometimes you don't want friends to leave you, but we're not here on this earth to stay, and we don't know when we're leaving. And so you have to prepare, not only to meet your maker, but you've got to prepare so that when you leave here, it's not a blank between your birth and your birth year and your death year. And for Andrea, I mean, there's so much that she did in those 70 plus years, and there's so much that she gave to so many people in those years. And I think sometimes some of those lessons we're rewinding.
I mean, I think of my business, I think of all the women that she's, been in contact with. I look at Lorianne Harris and her lobbying firm, my firm, Daphne Sloan Morgan, her firm, and just the countless at Bridget Wall Lemon, $2 billion development going on in Raleigh,
There is no question that there is an entire generation of African American women in North Carolina who owe their sanity to Andrea Harris. She saw the trails we were blazing and was always there to talk through strategy, to, as I said, keep us accountable.
Because Andrea had an impact across a number of different communities, disciplines, industries, and in particular the business industry, because Andrea was able to go in and out of CEOs' doors and make proposals that would be acknowledged and acted upon, that benefited a number of African American in particular and women business enterprises across not only the Triangle, but the state.
Dr. Harris called me and said, I need you and your VP to come to this meeting in 3 days. And the company that I worked for was in Tallahassee, Florida. As soon as I hung up the phone with her, I picked up the phone with the VP of our practice area and said, Andrea Harris wants you in Raleigh, North Carolina in 3 days. Make it happen, right? So even her influence reached other places in other states. And sure enough, he rearranged his schedule. He and I went to that meeting. We talked about the impact of what the study would bring.
So have we groomed another Andrea? Have we groomed another Andrea or other Andreas? We don't need one, we need a lot.
Well, the impact is that people like Andrea come along every 50, 100 years. And so how do you go out and just develop a person overnight like Andrea? It's not gonna happen. Hopefully we will have a great many people in this state and in this region who will pick up where she left off.
I think Bob his point is well taken. There's not a lot of people just sort of standing in line made out of the mold of her. And I think I will, like a lot of others, miss her mentorship, her guidance, her wisdom, and I'll just be transparent, and her ability to go get money for people who don't have, and go get things for people who don't know how to get it. There will be some misses for us because we don't have her, and we've got to find, and we've got to step in that gap.
You know, when Andrea and I were in college, there were a lot of us. There was a Gladys and an Andrea and a Sandra and a Carla, and all of us went different directions, but we went out there to make impacts in different areas.
I think we have a lot of Andreas out there. It's just a matter of how broad their reach is. We have so much wealth and talent in our communities. So many people who have the desire and the skills to move us forward. They sometimes don't understand how to coordinate so that they can maximize their effectiveness. But she was one who was able to maximize her effectiveness because she understood how systems worked. And she wasn't afraid to speak up.
And I don't think we have anybody that's up and coming who has that same drive, that same input, that same access. There are probably very few people in the country that have that. And she never, ever told you who she knew. But if you asked her a question, a poignant question, and then you would find out who she had access to.
Study the life of Andrea Harris. I think you'll find examples in her life that will help you personally, professionally, emotionally, spiritually. Because again, she was a woman who I think best exemplified, and that's not without fault. Don't hear me saying that she was perfect. None of us are perfect. But in terms of meeting and using everything that God blessed her with, she didn't leave very much on the table. She was an example for those of us who got to walk with her. She can be an example for generations to come. Study the life of my sister, my shero, my hero, Andrea Harris, and I believe that you can be benefited personally, professionally, and otherwise. She was a wonderful human being.
She reminded me, she said, people sometimes forget the H doesn't always mean Harris. It could mean Harriet. And to remind us of how tough she was, even as she was transitioning, that the spirit of freeing people to be better. And I remember one of the quotes that she told me, and it sits with me to this very day. She said, Harriet Tubman said, I could have freed more slaves if they knew they were slaves. And Miss Harris lived that life. She kept going back to free more people and then to try to transform their minds. I think people who embody what Miss Harris comes around maybe every 50 to 100 years, but her spirit never dies. She has the same spirit of leaders like Malcolm X, to leaders like Barack Obama, to new leaders like Vice President Harris, that shares her last name. I'm sure Miss Harris would be really proud today.
Andrea is one of those persons who never dies in your ministry, in your memory, but you always want them back. Now, we don't get to get her back. But then I thought maybe that's why she poured so much of herself out. Because we don't have to have her back. She's in all of us. You know, some people live, and when you look at their lives, you say, they still had some more that they needed to do. They left something on the table. And then there's some people who is almost as though God gets every bit, it's kind of like the old-timey squeezing of an orange. God gets every bit of the nutrients, the juice out of them. And then they rest. But they've poured out everything into so many that in a real sense, they're never not with us. I've talked to people who are Andrea mentored, blessed out, encouraged, loved, pushed, prodded, pleaded with, and all of us got a little peace. And thank God we do. Because the worst thing that could have happened was somebody like an Andrea Harris to live and she not give it away so that when she's no longer with us, her wisdom, her love, her testimony, her fight, her vigor, her courage would no longer be existing in the earth.
First of all, Andrea Harris was a good friend to me. Always supportive. It didn't matter what I tried to do. I could always count on Andrea Harris. And if you had Andrea for a friend, she would always be there. She wouldn't talk about you. She wouldn't let anybody else talk about you. And whatever project you undertook, Andrea always assisted.
Her aura and persona were so huge given her physique, which was so tiny. I've often referred to her in watching her in those board meetings as the tiny giant. Nobody gets in her way.
Thanks for being my teacher, my mentor, great friend, helping us stay focused on what's true. I always look forward to our conversations. I loved talking with her. And she taught me so much, personally, professionally. So, Andrea, I love you, I miss you, and thank you for everything you've done.
If people really wanted to promote a legacy for Andrea, it would be how do we help our community to be better? How do we reach back and pull somebody else along that otherwise might not be encouraged, might not be able to move forward on their own? And if we can figure out a way to continue that, I think that would promote a legacy that she would have ever wanted to leave more than anything else.
She was selfless. Andrea never asked anybody for anything, wouldn't take anything from anybody. But you know, being fearless, being selfless, being bright, and she had a sense of humor.
We are all one whole, a part of each other. And we need to act like it. We're all God's children. And when we leave here, the Lord doesn't want to know whether or not, did you make a lot of money? Did you build a lot of buildings? Did you preach a lot of sermons? All he wants to know is how much good did you do? And we will all be judged by how much good that we did. Andrea will be in our hearts and minds forever because she preached it, she lived it, she worked it. She was all about how much good can we do to lift up our people, lift up our state, lift up the institutions in this state, and she worked at it. Many people will talk about it, but she worked at it over and over again.
I continue to be guided by her counsel, confidence, compassion, and warrior spirit. I am blessed that God intersected our paths. You generously marked me to be the change that others can see and be. Your footprint in life will last eternally.
She was always trying to help out small businesses, and I would say to her, I'm a small business, you're not helping me. And she would say, Amara, I cannot help you because that would be seen as nepotism. And I am impartial, I have to, do that. But it didn't bother me that much because she would help out so many of my friends who had companies and businesses and give them internships. I mean, half of them I didn't even realize worked for mine. They're like, I used to work for Yon. I'm like, she gave you a job too?
She was that person who pushed me to do it. Otherwise, probably I wouldn't step into, outside my comfort zone.
She's managed to change people's mindsets. She's managed to impact communities. She's managed to bring people together on causes where there's so much cultural divide. I think she's a conquistadora.
And so when things were not moving along the timeline on Paris Street that she wanted to see, she would call me out. And I'd never forget with my other three partners, they would say, well, Carl, I thought you had a great relationship with Ms. Harris. Why is she beating us up so much? Can't you go over there and work something out? It's like, nah, I can't do that. She believes what she believes. She loves me, but by the same token, right is right. And she wanted things to happen, and they weren't happening fast enough for her.
I learned so much from Andrea, and I am deeply appreciative of the many opportunities she gave me. Thank you so much for being a friend and a mentor to me and for all you've done for the state of North Carolina.
So let me say good morning, particularly since I'm starting on my people's time. And if you can't give, you go get. And if you can't give or get off. You ordered a bottle of champagne for our table. And I thought you ordered it for everybody, and I told them to bring it for everybody, and they did, and you had to pay for it. Lou looked at him, and Lou said, yeah, but Rev, I just really have been in church in a long time, and I listened to your sermon, and it was such a good sermon, that was really a hell of a sermon. So I just thought there was a man that was just kind of off a little, because when you're in the commerce department, first of all, there probably were 5 of us in there that looked like me. This work for me is surely about economic development and about the quality of life, but also, let me say, this work for me is about justice. I come into this work out of a sense of wanting to see justice and opportunity for my people and for other people, and I want to see that across lines of race and gender and class and geography.